Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Freely Nourished, the podcast that empowers you to break the cycle of dieting while teaching you to nourish your body well. I am your host, registered dietitian Erin Casey, and owner of New You Nutrition Counseling, where we believe that you can reach all of your health goals at just about any body size. So if you are ready to get off of that roller coaster of dieting once and for all and to finally find freedom with food and your body, break away from that cycle of shame and guilt around your body, around food, please check us out. We have lots of one-on-one coaching options as well as group coaching options and online courses available for you at our website, newunutrition.com. I will link all of that for you in the show notes. And if you're not sure where to start, book a free discovery call. We are here for you in any capacity that we can be. So if you kind of look at the website and the options are overwhelming and you're not sure what to do, book a call. That is just a 15-minute quick, no obligations, no charge, no nothing. It's completely free. You sit down with one of us and we basically talk to you about kind of what are your nutrition goals, what are your goals with food and your body, and what we have to offer and kind of what may wind up being the best fit for you. Like I said, that's completely free. You can also sign up for those on our website. I'll link the page for that specifically as well in the show notes. But we definitely welcome anything that you can bring to our doorstep. We will gladly do what we can to help you walk through. And today, what we've got to talk about is a something that kind of keeps popping up in some of my client sessions, in some of my internet interactions, and anytime I just kind of get something that is like persistently a question that I get, I figure, you know what, it's probably about time I did a podcast on that. So today we are going to be talking about the blood type diet. It is also known as kind of, the Eat Right for Your Type diet. That is the book it was based on. If you're not familiar, it was based on a book that I believe was written in 1996. I need to double check that. But 1996 by Dr. Peter D'Amaro, who is a naturopathic physician. And the goal of the blood type diet is that he is kind of based on your blood type, which I'll get into in a minute what that means. He's creating kind of an ideal diet for you. And his premise is that, our blood types function differently in the body. They metabolize different foods differently. And as a result, we would do better to eat the foods that our bodies specifically are designed to digest best based on our blood type. For kind of optimal health, but also just, to feel better. And just to kind of, back up a couple of steps, right? Dr. D'Amaro is a naturopathic physician, which I think, with so many ways and avenues in the medical field today, I think it gets really confusing really quickly in terms of kind of who you're talking to and what that person's background is. So I think when most of us hear the term doctor, we assume kind of the traditional medical doctor or MD. And that used to be kind of the only route to treating patients was through medical school. But it's actually not at all anymore. So I'll kind of talk about the traditional route, and then we'll kind of get into some of these alternative routes that other people take. So traditionally, to become a medical doctor, and this is still true today, but it's just they're not the only ones with the term doctor anymore. But to become a medical doctor, you went through about 4 years of undergraduate. You typically take a lot of like very biology and some anatomy and chemistry and kind of very science heavy courses that are more basic science. And then when you graduate with your degree in, the Bachelor of Science, usually in like a biology or chemistry or something along those lines, because those are the classes you're taking. And then you go to medical school where you get into a lot of the harder biochemistry, anatomy, and then kind of, things like treating specific diseases. So kind of the true medicine of, applying all this chemistry and biology and stuff that you learned into the human body, right? Med school is typically about 4 years. And then not about 4 years, it is 4 years. And then you go on to like internships and residencies and things like that. So really by the time you're practicing on your own, you've put at least 8 to 10 years post high school graduation into your education. So that's a traditional kind of medical doctor route. I would say In the late 60s, early 70s, doctors of osteopathy became a little bit more popular. The route to, because it's a pretty well established field, osteopathy is very similar to medical doctors. So they are, again, you go through your 4 years of prerequisites basically, and then you go into 4 years of a doctorate degree at a medical school. I will say there's just kind of a slightly different ideology behind true MDs versus DOs. And it's a very subtle difference. They function very, very similarly in practice. Both of them are able to bill insurance. For example, they have NPI numbers, they have licenses that are recognized by, their respective states. They also, are able to write prescriptions. They can apply for DEA licenses, which gives you the right to, write controlled substances and things of that nature. Osteopaths are a little different in that they kind of tend to consider kind of a person as a whole system, as opposed to an MD who may be more like a cardiologist or an endocrinologist or a gastroenterologist. They have a kind of these subspecialties where they focus on kind of that one system of the body, but don't tend to see it as a whole. Osteopaths kind of tend to see how these things work in the whole. But that said, they do specialize as well. So functionally, they're very, very similar. Just their education and kind of the ideology behind their education is slightly different, but very, very similar. Then there's things like, PAs and nurse practitioners, right? So you get the same 4-year degree. For nurse practitioners, most nurse practitioners have worked as a nurse or as an RN for a period of time before basically pursuing a graduate degree, which is a master's level degree in advanced practice, which is, a nurse practitioner or APRN. There is also, you can go to PA school, which is another kind of master's level degree. PAs and nurse practitioners are limited in terms of what they can do without the supervision of a doctor. So both of those fields, you have to work under the supervision of a DO or a medical doctor in order. And, how responsible that supervising provider is for reading your notes, guiding your practice, that's going to vary practice to practice. But ultimately, those two entities, they cannot practice on their own. There has to be a medical doctor that supposedly reads over their notes every day, signs off on everything they're doing. And they're basically kind of there to be an assistant is kind of like a loose term. They're more there to be kind of handle the lesser complicated things that are kind of more common in whatever area. And again, they can specialize as well. But they kind of defer to the doctor for the more complicated cases. And that frees up the doctor's time to maybe do procedures and things like that the nurse practitioner or PA may not be trained on, but they can handle kind of the run-of-the-mill stuff that comes in all the time. And then we have naturopaths. So naturopaths kind of follow that same initial trajectory. So they go through 4 years of undergraduate training and get a bachelor's degree in something usually similar, related to medical science. And then they go to 4 years of naturopathic medical school. And this is the one that is very different. So naturopathic medicine is very different from kind of traditional Western medicine. They focus a lot more on things like herbs and supplements and things of that nature rather than pharmaceutical agents. In fact, NDs or naturopathic doctors cannot write prescriptions at all. They don't have an NPI number. They cannot bill insurance. They are not recognized kind of by the greater medical community as being legitimate. And I don't say that to say that they're not legitimate. It's just kind of in terms of where this is a newer practice. So this is kind of it probably came along in the 70s as well, but it didn't take off quite like osteopathy did. So it's just a little different. They also, kind of focus on things like, Reiki and acupuncture and kind of a lot of these kind of what we call alternative type medicines. And again, it's not that there's not any validity to it. It's just that it's not as widely recognized. I think it is important to note here too that a lot of kind of the regimens and the reason why it's not recognized, or a lot of the reason why some of the strategies that they use is not as widely recognized, is because there's no data to back it up. And I will take this opportunity to kind of say that the medical system, including medical research, is definitely flawed. it is not without political influence. It is not without financial influence. And it is not without agenda. So while the research we have is the research we have, that's all we have to base our decisions off of. That's not to say that there's not other truths out there that haven't been given their fair shake in terms of getting research dollars and things like that. And I could probably do a whole episode as to like what that means and specific examples and all that kind of stuff. That's not the point of this episode. But I do want to be clear that like the reason why naturopathic practice is not as recognized is because there's not data to support it. And there should be, and there hopefully will be kind of coming forward, but that's the why. So anyway, so Dr. Peter D'Amaro is kind of one of these more alternative medicine types. And he came up with this concept called the blood type diet, which is basing your diet on your blood type. So if you're not familiar, humans have we classify human blood types with what we call an ABO system. So that means you can be either type A, type B, type AB, or type O. That has to do with the type of antibodies and antigens you have on your red blood cells. So antigens are just kind of the proteins that can bind. They're little proteins that stick off of your red blood cell that an antibody can bind to. So an antibody from a different cell. They also have antibodies that will go and bind to different cells, right? So type A, you have type A antigens, but you have anti-B antibodies. Type B is the opposite. Type AB, you have no antigens, but you have both. You have both antigens and no antibodies. And then type O is you have no antigens and both antibodies. So and that's where it gets into you have to, when we're giving like blood transfusions and things like that, basically depending on the type of antibody you have and what you're putting it into, what we don't want to do is kind of mix things around to where you are giving somebody a blood type that has an antibody to the antigen that their current blood type is presenting towards, because that basically just means that their immune system is going to attack it. And I'm sure you guys have kind of like all heard of like, type A, I think is the most common. And then O is a universal donor, kind of things like that. If you're curious, kind of, you may have heard that like you're A positive or O negative or things like that. The positive and negative is a different system. There's a different peptide that you're either positive or negative for. So if you're A positive, you have type A blood on the ABO system, but then you're either positive or negative on what's called the RH system, which is just a different peptide. For the sake of the blood type diet, Dr. D'Amaro did not focus on the plus minus factor. All he focused on was the ABO typing. And basically kind of his whole premise is that, certain blood types, we have these different peptides and different antibodies on our blood. And because our blood is infiltrated into our digestive system, our bodies are kind of predisposed to break down certain foods or certain food types, certain nutrients, etc., better or worse than others, right? And he goes into, in the book, it goes into like, great detail as to what that means, right? But the long and the short of it is basically the different peptides on our blood determine how our digestive system functions and how it breaks down different things. And there are certain things that we're going to break down easier versus it's going to be harder for our bodies to break down because of the antigens or antibodies that our blood types are presenting with. And basically to optimize your health, to optimize your well-being, to feel good, you should be eating the things that are easy for you to break down and kind of avoiding the things that are harder for you to break down. And he kind of came up with these profiles of diets that would be beneficial based on his proclamations, we shall say. So just to kind of give you a very, very brief overview, type O is very well, prepared to break down protein. And then sometimes there's a need for different GI supplements because they have a harder time breaking down fat or carbohydrates. Type A has a hard time with meat, so has a harder time with protein, but does well with a diet high in fruits and vegetables. Type B should avoid corn, wheat, lentils, tomatoes, and sesame, and kind of watch how much chicken you eat because that can be a harder one. And then type AB, you should be eating lots of tofu, seafood, green vegetables. And because you tend to have lower stomach acid, you should avoid caffeine and alcohol. And smoked or cured meats because of that acid content. And like I said, he goes into a lot of very elaborate science in the book as to kind of what that means, right? Or why that might be based on these different peptides. And that all sounds great and very elaborate. But there is, and I kid you not when I say not a lick of chemistry, biology, physics, anatomy, preclinical trials, clinical trials. There is not a lick of science to support any of it. Not a one. There is, he talks about all these kind of like phenomenons of, these blood types, but we have no evidence to suggest that what he's asserting actually happens. Your body, generally speaking, uses what are called digestive enzymes that are secreted from your pancreas to break down your various nutrients. Now, it doesn't care if it's a carbohydrate that came from a strawberry, or it's a carbohydrate that came from honey, or it's a carbohydrate that came from a donut. It doesn't care. It just uses fructose or sucrase or whatever it is to break it down. So and how well your pancreas is able to secrete different enzymes really has nothing to do with your blood type as far as we know. We have no evidence to suggest that your blood type has anything to do with it. So basically he made this up. And I hate to say that, but there's literally no science behind it. I actually dug and dug and dug for probably at least half of a day trying to find something. I'm like, well, if nothing else, this thing was put out, 15 years ago. There's got to be at least somebody who's like looked at it since then to like at least try and validate it or invalidate it or whatever. And I kid you not when I tell you I found exactly one study, one clinical trial looking at this diet, and the clinical trial was in 2013, so it was well after the book was ever written. So none of this helps to like guide the formation of the blood type diet. It was more or less, does this actually work? And basically what they did is they looked at kind of people who ate, and I will say this isn't the best design study because it was like a post hoc study. So they took a big data set that they had food frequency questionnaires from anyway, and they kind of took people and saw if they could fit people in categories of fitting into these blood type diets. And they actually were able to. They were able to kind of, there was people who kind of were vegetarian, so like they kind of fit that A type diet, and then they were able to kind of, based on a variety of regressions, kind of filter people out into, they weren't instructed to eat in a certain way, but people who naturally fit into one blood type or the other. And they have to meet a certain threshold in terms of, adherence to that type of diet. Otherwise, the data was just thrown out. So anyway, they found that people who followed the type A or AB diet had better cardiometabolic markers, which that means like lipids, blood sugar management, insulin resistance or lack of insulin resistance, better blood pressure, and a healthier weight. So that was type A or AB. And then people who follow the type O diet tended to have lower triglycerides, which, okay, that sounds great. But if we put on our critical thinking caps, if you go back and look at what those diets are, so the A or the AB diets are the ones that are kind of lowest in meat or processed foods and highest in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. We know that, right? That's basically all I tell people all day long is, we have pretty good evidence now to suggest that, the more plant-based proteins we can do, the better. That said, it doesn't have to be absolute. But we know that more plant-based proteins is better for your health, generally speaking. And we definitely know that fruit and vegetable intake is great for your health. These are not shocking things. So no surprise that people who ate less meat, less processed food, more fruits, more vegetables, shockingly, they're in better health. Who would have thunk it? And then what I think is just really the cherry on top of this one study that did look at the blood type diet is when they basically took data that they already had of people who were basically already at baseline, just eating kind of within these four categories without being told to do so. And when they correlated that with what their blood type actually was, all of the effects disappeared. Right. So basically what that means is that, like, if you were somebody who has type O blood, but you were following a type A diet, you were in better health than somebody who had type O blood than somebody who, I'm sorry, somebody who had type O blood who was following a type O diet. There was no correlation whatsoever between the actual blood type and the blood type diet. All the study showed is that eating less meat, less processed food, more fruits and vegetables is better for your health, which, like, that's not rocket science. We knew that. So basically this kind of, again, reiterates the point that this diet, to be honest with you, is bogus. And I know I come on here and say that there's a lot of things that are bogus. If you haven't gotten the memo from my anti-diet approach, that I don't love the idea of a fixed diet for anyone. But this one is particularly bonkers, y'all. And it's scary because when you read through the text, Dr. D'Ambrose sounds so scientific and so sure. And it's frustrating because to the average consumer, who maybe doesn't have a background in medical science, which, most people don't, that's going to sound really appealing and really logical. And something worth trying. And it's super unfortunate that somebody that has this level of a degree and knows better, frankly, should know better, and should have be more diligent in the research and things that he asserts, than that somebody at that level is basically lying. And even if that's kind of what he believes, what he wants to continue to research, what he preaches to his own patients, that's one thing. But to, like, put it out there for the entire world out of context, without any additional support, that's just irresponsible and, in my opinion, dangerous. So short answer, no, I do not recommend this diet. One, because there is absolutely no data to support it, and the only data we have on it proves that it is a bunch of bull. It doesn't have any effect. So with that, I will leave you to critically evaluate any diet trends that you see. They are not always truthful. They are not always evidence-based. And they are certainly not always worth your time. So with that, I will leave you until next time. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you soon.